Hi, welcome to the 14-day weather forecast. I hope you've all had a fantastic Christmas and got whatever you wanted. Unfortunately, Santa didn't bring me any snow this year, just for a change, but I did get this rather awesome jumper. And if you look at it closely through the course of the video, you may notice one or two interesting things happening. Anyway, what a year 2022 has been in weather terms. We had the record-breaking heat wave in July. Temperatures reached 40 Celsius for the first time on record in the UK, and each of the first 11 months was warmer than the central England temperature average. It looked as though December may well have made it 12 out of 12, but it isn't to be, or at least it's very unlikely. Provisionally to the 26th, December is running 1.9 Celsius below the average. Of course, due to the very, very cold weather which affected most of the country during the first half of the month. It has subsequently turned milder, but the increase in temperatures haven't been enough to offset the much below average period which came earlier. As I say, it is milder, and the reason for that is the Atlantic is firmly back in charge of the UK's weather. Low pressure here, centred to the northwest at 18 GMT, Wednesday the 28th. Tightly packed isobars, meaning strong winds, showers or longer spells of rain in much of the UK, and still a little bit of white shading there over Scotland, indicating snow. Now, as I run this sequence through the first week of the forecast period, not a great deal changes. Further disturbances move across the UK, very windy at times with the closely packed isobars. And then New Year's Eve into New Year's Day, this particular computer model run is showing a very nasty area of low pressure approaching from the west. Extremely strong winds there wrapped around it and pushing up across southern and central parts of the United Kingdom. Heavy outbreaks of rain associated with it. Just running this through to its conclusion, that pulls away northeastwards, and then for a time, high pressure has more influence in the south and the east of the UK, increasing the chance for a drier period. But towards the end, the Atlantic is back in charge there with further strong winds and possibly more outbreaks of rain. Lots happening through the first week. Not much sign of it turning wintry again in the southern half of the UK. Things are a little bit more mixed there in the north. Just to see what's causing all this, it's the jet stream profile. Running the animation here again. There's a powerful jet out in the Atlantic. It's weakening initially, at least as it approaches the UK, but you can see it's heading across southern parts of the country, keeping that unsettled theme going. As I run this, that strong jet moves across the UK at times. It keeps heading towards us, but then it is weakening later on, becoming a little bit more less well formed, just suggesting for a time at least that it could be turning a little bit drier, at least in the south and the east, as I've mentioned. But there is a lot of uncertainty towards the end of the first week, and I'll look at that a little bit later. Looking at the temperatures, though, associated with that GFS model run, 15 GMT, Thursday the 29th, close to average in the south, a little bit above it, colder in the north. Moving forwards to Saturday, so New Year's Eve, it's mild in the south, very mild, 13 to 14 Celsius, colder there still in the north. And one of the things through the course of the first week is with those disturbances moving up from the southwest, they will be pulling mild or even warm air up ahead of them, and that's most likely to be pushing across the southern half of the UK, hence the reason for some of these high temperatures. But there will be quite a lot of variance on a day-to-day basis and generally colder in the north. So the same applies to the nights. This is New Year's Day minimum, so 06 GMT. Double figures there in southern England, but in the north it's very cold indeed, down to -5, -6 in the northern half of Scotland. So a big temperature gradient across the UK, if this is correct. But there is a lot of uncertainty about the details, and I'm just using these charts to illustrate the general trends through the first week. Monday the 2nd of January, maximums now once more, close to average in southern and central parts of the UK, rather cold there still in the north. I think the trend through the first week is really therefore often close to or above the average in the south in terms of temperatures, close to or a little bit below it in the north. But one of the big features, I think, rather than temperatures, is going to be the strength of the winds. As I say, the details do become uncertain after the first few days, so keep up to date with the short-range forecasts. This chart shows wind gusts which the GFS model is forecasting on New Year's Day, so it's actually for 15 GMT. The reds there across the UK, especially England and Wales, indicating 50 to 60 miles an hour, quite widely being shown, even a little bit higher in places, nudging up towards 70 miles an hour in central regions here. But it will be varying, and if I just bring up the Mogreps G ensemble plot showing wind gusts for London, so Mogreps G is the UK Met Office ensemble model. Across the horizontal column here, it's time, so starting the 28th of December, going forwards to the 5th of January, the vertical axis shows forecast wind gust speeds in miles per hour. Each one of the lines on this graph is representing the forecast through the time period from an individual run within the ensemble model. The key thing really, I think, is around this period of 30th of December to the 1st of January. There's some big spikes there showing up, a number of the individual runs going up to 50 miles an hour or even above it. So very, very strong winds if these are correct. But the distribution here, the scatter, suggests uncertainty about when the strongest winds are likely to be. It's between the 30th of December and the 1st of January, but it's all to do with the timing of those areas of low pressure which are moving in from the southwest, the track they take and how intense they become. As I say, do keep up to date with the short range forecasts because New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, they do have a potential to be very windy. And that's just reinforced by the Mogreps G postage stamp plot here for New Year's Eve, midday. So instead of showing all the runs going forwards over a period of time, this is showing wind gust speeds in the UK at 12 GMT on New Year's Eve. You can't really see the UK particularly well, but it's in the centre of these individual stamps. The orange and red shading indicates the strong winds, so 50 to 60 miles an hour. They're being forecast by a number of the individual runs at this time. As I say though, do keep up to date with the developments in the coming days because there is that uncertainty about when the strongest winds are going to affect the UK. Rainfall. These are the accumulated totals for days 0 to 5 being forecast by the ECM model and the GFS. Wettest in the north and the west, but all regions seeing significant amounts. Moving forwards to days 0 to 10, the totals have continued stacking up in the north and the west. Oranges and reds there indicating over 100 millimetres in western Scotland, parts of northwestern England and western Wales. But in central and eastern England, the values haven't risen a great deal, suggesting the possibility of drier conditions becoming more likely in the days 5 to 10 part of the forecast period, at least in central and eastern counties. So, do the deterministic models support each other as we head towards the end of the first week, or do they all go off in their own separate directions? Here is the GFS, which the animation was based on, Wednesday the 4th of January. Quite a mixed picture still at this point. High pressure to the southwest and to the southeast. The Canadian model at the same time shows high pressure becoming more influential. It's building up there from the south to southeast. Unsettled conditions increasingly becoming focused on the northwest. The German icon, quite an unsettled pattern with high pressure further south. The European ECM, this one looks closer to the Canadian model. High pressure there from the southeast starting to build towards the UK. And finally, the UK Met Office Global. High pressure from the south, maybe looking like it's going to have more influence, although at this particular stage, there's a little feature there bringing the risk of rain to southern Britain. Those deterministics are all quite mixed, rather changeable or unsettled, with some hints of high pressure starting to build up from the south. Does the Mogreps G ensemble which is run by the UK Met Office, provide any more insights. Each one of these stamps represents the forecast pressure patterns from one of the individual runs in the ensemble at the same time. The general theme here is for high pressure, effectively shown by the orange and yellow shading, to be having more influence in the southern part of the UK. The greens and blues and purples there in the north and the west on some of these plots show more unsettled weather. So I think taking the deterministic models into account alongside the Morgreps-G, the general picture is for high pressure to perhaps be having more of a say in things as you head further southwards and maybe southeastwards, with the Atlantic continuing to dominate in the west and the northwest. That's at the end of week one. What happens as we head through the second week? As ever, at this range, it is just about trends and probabilities, not forecast specifics. And I'll start with the 16-day GEFS plot for London and southern England. The air temperature profile across the top presents quite a strong signal. The ensemble mean there, the thick purple line, staying above the thick black line, which is the 30-year average. Warmer than the normal at 1,500 metres approximately above sea level. Although towards the very end, the ensemble mean is dipping away. There are a few colder runs starting to show up just at the very end of the forecast period and a little bit beyond it. The number of spikes across the bottom isn't as great as it is earlier on. So through the first week, there are lots there. It's very unsettled. As we head through the second week, rain spikes continue to appear, but the general theme is probably for it to be drier on some days at least, high pressure having more influence. The snow row across the bottom shows the number of runs in the ensemble forecasting snow on a given day. It's only at the very, very end that it starts to tick up. It reaches 5 on the 13th of January, so just a little bit beyond the end of the forecast period, which I'm covering today. But it does maybe suggest that there could be something happening as we head towards the middle of January. And I've just broken out those colder runs to illustrate that. This is data from the GEFS. It's only plotting the runs for the London area where 850 HPA temperatures, so those at approximately 1,500 metres above sea level, are dipping down below -10 Celsius at any point within the 16 days of the run. In total, there could be 31, but there are only 3, and those are all showing up towards the very end. I think it is something that needs keeping an eye on as we head through the coming days. Is it the start of a trend towards a colder period through the middle of January, maybe the last third of the month, or is it just noise and scatter in the ensemble forecasts? It's too early to say. Looking at the 2-metre temperature data table for London, the light greens showing the forecast maximums of all the runs on each individual day in the different columns. 6 to 10 Celsius, the yellows 11 to 15 Celsius, and the dark greens, the ones which are going for colder conditions. The blues are very cold ones. Generally, temperatures look likely to be close to or above the average for much of the second week, at least in southern England. Going up to Manchester, the air temperature profile here is actually very similar to London. The ensemble mean there remaining above a 30-year average really throughout, just dipping at the very end like the London one was. There are more spikes, more rain spikes on the bottom part of the plot than there were on the London one, suggesting a greater risk of rain as you start heading northwestwards. But the snow row values remain very low. Just at the end there, they start to tick up like they were doing on the London plot. The 2-metre temperatures for Manchester, light greens, plenty of those in the daily maximum columns. So rather mild. There is more dark green than on the London plot, but still not very much. Those are the runs going for between 1 and 5 Celsius as the daily maximums. It looks like close to or above the average is more likely than below it, even in northwestern England. But continuing the journey and to Glasgow, There is a difference this time on the 850 HPA temperature part of the plot. The air temperatures at 1500 metres above sea level, they are fluctuating more than they were on the other two, and they are closer to the average, perhaps dipping a little bit below it on some days, and especially there towards the very end. In terms of rainfall, more spikes than the London chart and more than the Manchester one as well. A wetter picture, and the snow row values are higher, not very high, 7, 8s, 9s on a number of days, but a low to moderate chance maybe of snow in this part of the UK. Certainly significantly higher than it is in England, Wales and Northern Ireland. It's really Scotland where the focus is if you're looking for wintry weather through the second week of the forecast period, at least based on this data. It could be actually very good for the Scottish ski resorts. There may well be some big falls of snow over the mountains. The 2 metre temperature data table for Glasgow, more dark green appearing than on the Manchester and London tables, but still a significant amount of light green. I think just to summarise it, it looks like temperatures here are often close to the average. On some days a little bit below it, maybe on one or two others just climbing above it a fraction, but all in all close to or slightly above the slightly below the average in the northwest would probably be a reasonable summary, as opposed to above the average as you move down to Manchester and then to London. The GEFS 10-day surface level pressure ensemble mean, this is Saturday the 7th of January. It's indicating really an Atlantic flow there across the United Kingdom, high pressure to the southeast over continental Europe, a positive North Atlantic oscillation pattern. Details, it's impossible to derive from something like this, which is generated from all of the individual runs, but there isn't really a signal here for it to be cold. It does look very much like a classic Atlantic dominated scene, and that's reinforced by the comparable plot from the European ensemble. If anything, it's a little bit more amplified, high pressure over continental Europe being more influential perhaps over the UK. That would support the idea of the unsettled conditions becoming more focused in the northwest, a greater chance of drier periods in the south and the east. The GEFS mean surface level pressure data table for York, so instead of averaging out all of the individual runs in the GEFS, it plots them in the columns as individual ones. The oranges indicate high pressure, so 1026 to 1040 millibars. The yellows span 1011 to 1025 millibars. Therefore, many of the runs within the yellow category are at least a little bit above the average. The greens, blues and purples, lower pressure, very mixed. It was similar last week. It's quite difficult to really conclude too much from this. A number of the runs bringing in deeper areas of low pressure, whilst a significant amount of them are suggesting that it will be high pressure, which is dominant. I think it probably points towards quite a changeable picture. And the GEFS postage stamps for Saturday, the 7th of January, really reinforce a message. Each one showing the pressure patterns from one of the runs within the ensemble. On these particular plots, it varies on different apps and different websites, but on the Weather Outlook ones, the blues and purples at this level indicate where areas of low pressure are likely to be. And if those are to the northwest of the UK, because each of these stamps shows the North Atlantic region, so if we've got blues and purples to the top left there, it's likely to be suggesting rather mild conditions across the UK, quite unsettled with a positive NAO pattern. A few of them, though, have high pressure over continental Europe, keeping things drier in the south and the east, just really reinforcing the message that it's more unsettled as you head further northwest. Right, to summarise the next 2 weeks. Week 1, it's unsettled as we head towards the new year, with heavy rain and strong winds affecting all parts of the UK. And over the Scottish mountains, there could well be significant amounts of snow. It possibly turns drier in the south and the east after New Year's Day, but there is uncertainty about that happening. Temperatures fluctuate, colder in the north than the south, where on some days it could turn very mild indeed for the time of the year. Week 2, the changeable theme continues. A risk of rain in all regions, but wettest in the north and the west. Dry periods more frequent in the south and east as high pressure starts to exert more of an influence. Temperatures close to the average in the north and above them in the south, but at the very end and just beyond the forecast period itself, there is a weak signal currently showing for temperatures to start dipping. It could just be noise in the ensemble models, which may drop out in the coming days, or alternatively, it may be the start of a new trend. Definitely something to keep an eye on. So, there we have it. Very typical British winter fare on offer through the next 2 weeks, I think. At least in terms of what we've come to expect in recent times. Often wet, often windy, often mild, at least in southern and central parts of the UK. Now, the question which I've asked in my last couple of updates is, will we be following the 2010-11 template, the cold period in December, followed by predominantly mild weather in January and February, or could it be closer to 1978-79, which was when winter really tightened its grip during January and February, and it ended up as the third coldest of the 20th century. At the moment, I think the evidence points to the former, the 2010-11 template, but there are those tentative signs of temperatures dipping towards the middle of January. Therefore, it is something to keep an eye on as we head through the coming days and weeks. Finally, I hope my jumper wasn't too distracting. I hope you didn't see through it too much. But anyway, if it was a problem, I'll not be wearing it again on my next update. Now, if you found this useful and enjoyed it, please consider subscribing to the channel as well as liking this presentation. By subscribing, you'll be kept informed whenever I publish a new video, so you'll never need to miss one. Right, well, thank you for watching, and I wish you all the best for the new year. And I'll have another update early next week. Thanks now. Bye.